Right, no, I got shit. All right.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Seashore Trolley Museum and our 85th anniversary trolley parade. Yeah, give the museum a big round of applause. My name is Scott, and I'm one of the volunteers in the operating department here at the museum. Over the next hour or so, we are hoping to present some of the cars that some of you might be used to seeing when you come to Seashore before, and you'll also see things that many of you have never seen before. But before we really start the parade, I want to take you back 85 years. So we're talking about the summer of 1939. None of this was here, right? None of it. And we'd probably be standing in a little bit of a stop. This is before the great fires in France in 1947. We would have had old growth behind you. All that was here were a couple of farms towards the front and a power line right of way running through. But many years before, it had actually been an operating trolley line. But none of this was here. And then one day in 1939, a very strange sight was seen along this street that has come to be called Lock Cabin Road. It was a wrecker, a big tow truck, coming down the road, and attached to that wrecker was another wrecker, so weighed down by its load that when it tried to move, its front tires kept coming up off the street. So the solution was to tow the tow truck. Hey, Mr. Scratcher, could we see what that heavy load was they were trying to tow that day? Another car of the Seashore Trolley Museum, car 31 from the Bishop and Saco Railroad. This is the local trolley line for those two cities and Old Orchard Beach. In 1939, they were doing what a lot of trolley lines were doing. They had announced they were getting rid of the trolleys and replacing them with buses. The Biddeford and Saco had been a very popular trolley line for people like us, rail fans. First of all, it only cost 5 cents to ride the trolley. There was track in the streets, there was track out in the countryside, and you could go to the beach with something like this. And the company was pretty hospitable when rail fans came along and wanted to snoop around and chase everybody away. Well, in that spring of '39, when it was announced the buses were coming, 3 young rail fans, all from the Boston area, they were probably college age, a little older, hatched what probably seem like a ridiculous idea. Could they convince a company to sell them one of the old trolley cars? Not to start a museum, but to have sort of a keepsake of their favorite trolley car. The management said yes. $300. That was the scrap price of the car. This is 1939. We're still coming out of Depression. They might as well have said $3 million. That's way too much. Eventually, the price got knocked down to $150. Still kind of. So our three originators pulled in more of their railfan friends, came up with $150. And on the night of July 5th, 1939, when car 31 pulled in from its final run, it became the property of what was being called at that time the Seashore Electric Railway. Never mind that we didn't have a railway, we had no electricity, and it weren't that far from the seashore. But it became their prize, and their big headache, because the Biddeford and Saco had promised there would be no derelict trolley cars darkening the streets of Biddeford and Saco. In other words, these guys had to get the car out of town. You can't exactly throw something like this into the back of your car and drive it back to Boston. So the search went on for where could they put the car. And I'm boiling down a long story into a few words that they were made aware of a farmer in Kennebunkport who might have a piece of land that they could rent. It was a little triangle of land that years before had been cut off from the rest of his farm when the trolley line was built between Kennebunkport and Biddeford. That triangle was out front where our entrance is today. And they did indeed rent that land. And my narration about the tow trucks is really true. That's how they got it down here. And it got plopped into the weeds. All they did at that time was save a car. Right? And there's more to come on the way. Let's talk about the car for a moment. Car 31, I hate to tell you, in its day, this was nothing special. This was probably ordered out of catalog. The builder, the J.G. Grill Company in Philadelphia, was one of the largest makers of trolley cars. And yeah, they could make something custom for you, but they also had a go-to catalog. They're sized by benches. This is a 12-bench open car, delivered in 1900 and in service until the day trolley service ended in 1939. I'll tell you one other story real quick. This was restored in the 1970s in time for our 35th anniversary that year. The Biddeford and Saco was still in business as a bus company. And in a special ceremony about where that stop sign is over there, the management of the Biddeford and Saco handed our founders a large canvas bag. Inside the canvas bag were 3,000 nickels. Who's good at math? What does that come out to? $150. So we were paid back our original investment in the form that everybody remembered, the nickel fare. Of course, we had to put a lot more nickels into the restoration, but it was kind of nice that they paid us back. So we'll talk a little bit more about this. Dawn, could I have you move the car up, maybe a car length, and I'll send you off in a moment. Just pull it up for that. We're not talking about starting a trolley. They're saving their also, included buses to get away with the trolley. We have here. This is car 38. Originally had a different number, I'll tell you that story in a moment. It was built in 1906 and ran between Manchester and Nashua, Manchester and Goffstown, and some other routes as well. We can't take you all in there at this moment, but trust me when I tell you, it has green plush seats. gold leafing in the roof of the car. This was not somebody's special car. This is how they traveled in those days. And they took great pride in their workmanship. 38 was originally number 4. Then it became number 32. Then the original 38 was wrecked in an accident. And in a wonderful stroke of public relations, the trolley company took 32 and renumbered it 38 and told everybody that that was the wrecked car all to be built again. And back then, we did things like that. It was an early restoration here at the museum, and we're proud to have it out. We used it last year in our Christmas event, Christmas parade. I'll tell you one more quick story. These guys that started
You grab my drink. You grab my drink. Can you grab my drink?
I was watching this, so listen to them talk.
I am too.
You go get your damn drink.
And when we came to get 38,
Or just suck it up.
weren't running anymore. It was in a storage
Do you want me to be wired until midnight?
To a rail yard, to be put on a railroad flat car and brought up to Kennewick. Problem? You got the tracks still in the streets. It needed to get over the Merrimack River over a big bridge, but there's no power left in the line. So our guys are pondering this one day, and one of the workers for the power company, as a joke, says, well, why don't you call up, and he names the president of the power company. Why don't you call up Mr. So-and-so and ask him to turn the power back on? You know what's coming, right? They did. He said, sure, we'll turn it back on for you. So 38 actually has the distinction of being the very last trolley car to operate on the streets and over the Merrimack River in Manchester, New Hampshire. So now, this is 1940, right? We have 3 cars, because there was a second one for Manchester. Not much happened until after World War II, except that in 1941 we incorporated. We became the New England Electric Railway Historical Society, which is our official name. And after the war, a lot of trolley systems that had been postponed because of the war lost their trolleys, gave them up, either went out of business or allowed buses to take over. So our collection grew. Our collection is now over 250 vehicles from all over the world. You will hear us talk about and see in some of our literature, Seashore being the first trolley museum. Not the first in Maine, not the first in the United States. In 1939, these things were as commonplace as your cars are today. Everybody knew what a trolley or a streetcar was, but nobody in the whole world had thought to save one, so a future generation would know what they are. So number 31 isn't just the beginning of this museum. It is the beginning of the whole idea of preserving street railway equipment so future generations would know. So we're going to send them on their way now. So ladies and gentlemen, the very first trolleys that started us, 31 from Biddeford and Saco, and 38 from Manchester, New Hampshire. While they're moving, a lot of communities had the open cars. But as you can imagine, you can't use those in the winter. So many of them gave them up early on. Biddeford and Saco kept. All right, while the next trolley is moving into place, I need a show of hands. I'm going to do this real quick. How many of you are Biddeford? Over New Hampshire. All right. Your local trolley line was the Atlantic Shore line, and I'll get back to that in a moment. You're looking at the reason why trolley service came to southern Maine in the first place. Nobody had some grand idea to lay down tracks and carry people from point A to point B. Mainers are too practical about that. It started with industry. There were large textile mills in the nearby town, now city, of Sanford. And those mills had a problem. They needed to be able to use the nation's railroads to get their finished goods to market and bring their raw materials into the mill. But the nearest rail connection was a mile away in Sanford's village of Springdale. And the railroad would not build a spur line into the mills. The owners of the mills were very, very much aware of technology in their day. So they pulled in a set of investors and they built a trolley line from the mills to the railroad yard. One other thing they did was to cross the river in Sanford and put more tracks right down to the middle of town. Now, they could take the freight cars back and forth without having to pay the railroad to load and unload onto their wagons over at the rail yard, cutting their costs. Passenger trolleys were added because the mill owners were smart enough to know that in towns where passenger cars had been made available, well, some people might take them and buy some property a little further away from the mill where they have a little more land to live on. People could take them to go shopping and all. So trolley service came into southern Maine that way. When that worked for them, they turned to their one other problem. The mills were burning through thousands of tons of coal every year. The mills used steam to run the machinery, process the cloth and such. The cheapest way to buy coal was by the shipload. And the nearest deep water port is Cape Porpoise over here. So they built a second trolley line from Sanford through South Sanford, a tiny corner of Alfred, through West Kennebunk, downtown Kennebunk, out to a tiny portion of the Cape Arundel Golf Course, out past what's now Log Cabin Road and out to the shore, out to Cape Porpoise Harbor, where they built a dock and a facility where the ships could transfer their coal to coaling cars. They would use locomotives like this to haul them. But then they were aware of what people were doing. On the other side of Cape Porpoise Harbor, they built a large two-story building, big porches on the first floor, dining room, a dance hall, the Cape Porpoise Casino. Not a place to gamble like we associate that word today, but a place where you could go to dance, to dine, and the trolley took you there. And the last trolley didn't leave till the casino closed at night. The trolley company had just opened the southern Maine coast to day tripping. Right? Some of you here today probably got in your automobile this morning in another town, perhaps in another state. You came here and you will go back there tonight. The early part of the 20th century, that was unheard of. But now they provided an easy way to go from, say, Sanford, where it could be 95 degrees on a hot summer day, to Kennebunkport, where it could be 70 sea breezes. These guys were really thinking. To tell you a little bit about the locomotive, this is number 100, one of three built in 1906 by the Laconia Car Company of Laconia, New Hampshire, another big builder of railroad and trolley equipment. In fact, some of their buildings still stand, and they have been repurposed just as some of the mill buildings in Sanford have. They called this basically a cab on a rack. It's a flat car with cab on it, and as you see, Todd and Kyle are part of our crew, they can see a lot of what's going on up there. So they would use this to haul freight. They would
Why don't you just go to the car?
other work
It was
purposes
closer
on the
to the
railroad. This was in service until 1949. When it came out of service, it came here. This was the last trolley car to operate in the state of Maine. Because by the end of things, by 1949, that line between the mills and the railroad was the last trolley line left in the state. So this was the very last car. When we restored it in the early 2000s, the question came up, how do we paint it? What color? Because the car came here green with red trim. We had pictures of it black with white letters, and even cream colored with red trim. So we brought in one of those outfits that specializes in analyzing paint. We scrape, 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 and they found that the original color was this chocolate brown. I like to call it our rolling Hershey bar, but this is original to the car. We restored the car in 3 years
That's a good name.
thanks to a locally administered federal grant, and now you see it as it would have looked a long time ago. So ladies and gentlemen from, well, we'll just say Sanford, Maine, but the whole southern area, locomotive number 100. The Atlantic shoreline eventually covered all the towns when I asked you where you were from. Covered all those towns. And they had their own fleet of ferry boats that would take you across the Piscataqua River from Kittery to Fort Worth. All right, this is car 396 from Boston, built in 1900, and there were hundreds of these cars built for the city at that time. This is extremely typical of what you would have found at that turn of the century time. We had just progressed, if you will, from horse-drawn streetcars to electrically operated cars. They were starting to get bigger, which, trust me, this was considered bigger in those days. It was in service in Boston for many, many years, both as a passenger car and eventually as a work car, until the mid-1950s. They were done with it. So it came here to Seashore as a work car. Pretty tired looking, too. And not much happened to it until 1963, when the film director Otto Preminger came calling. Preminger was in Boston to shoot a movie called The Cardinal, which basically follows the progression of a young man from the priesthood in Roman Catholicism up to being a cardinal. There was a need for scenes with a trolley car. So Preminger's company came here, found this, thought they could work with it, leased it from us. I believe it was $1, it wasn't much. And it was taken to the shops of the Transit Authority in Boston, and in 8 days, their shop crew restored the car as a passenger car. There were many suburbs of Boston at the time that still had their trolley tracks in the street, even though they weren't being used anymore. One of those was the city of Belmont, Massachusetts. And a lot of the homes in one particular neighborhood were all
City of what?
the same
Belmont.
early period.
I like said
So
double
the car
mount.
was hauled down to Belmont, and on a Sunday, they shot the movie scenes, both outside and inside the car. And then the trolley was returned here to Maine, fully restored. A few years later, it was borrowed by the Children's Television Workshop, people who produced Sesame Street originally, for a production that they were doing that had to do with a trolley strike in Brooklyn way back when. So the car was repainted for that. It has been repainted back to its Boston configuration. We call it the Cardinal car, but if there happen to be any production staff in the audience this afternoon and you're thinking of using this for your movie, it could be anything you want car. So I'm going to, Ethan, you can get back, oh, Ethan, yeah, you can stay out. Dave, we want to move the car up. A lot of you probably think this being a trolley motorman was a glamorous job. First off,
I'm all set,
look
thank
where
you.
Dave is. He is outdoors. It wouldn't matter if today was minus 20 degrees. It wouldn't matter if there was a raging blizzard or if it was 95 and broiling. He's outside, right? It was only after trolley motorman died that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts actually passed laws that required the trolley company to close in the vestibule so the motorman was protected. The other thing about these early cars, Dave's going to move the car. I want you to watch his right hand, okay, and see what he does. Let's go up just a short distance here. The other cars, some of them you'll hear hissing air. There is no hiss here. These are hand-operated brakes. So the motorman has to stop the car just with the force of his arm. They must have been very strong men back in those days. All right, Dave, can you move up about one more car length? We can get one more car in behind you. We're keeping it here for a reason. But ladies and gentlemen, from Boston, our cargo car number 396.
This is from the Phoenix area, I feel like. Because it says Kinsman and Buckeye in East 154th Street. Or E, I don't know. I don't have any like things saying though. That's on this side.
Well, that'll do. This is actually from Cleveland.
Nope, Cleveland.
This is car 1227 from Cleveland. Built in 1914. Look how big this thing is. All right? It's 51 feet long. It's the largest streetcar, pardon me, that we have in our collection. There's a reason for that. Okay? I'm going to use as my example Boston, because I grew up near there. In the day, you'd have trolleys all out on different routes in the suburbs picking up people. And eventually those trolleys would pull in to some sort of a transfer station. And the people would all get off and get on something bigger. Rapid transit. It might be an elevated train. It might be a subway car. In Boston's case, it was an elevated train that went into the subway. Right? But the point was, the trolley's job was all done. It could return to the suburbs. Cleveland didn't have the rapid transit yet. So the trolleys had to come all the way into the center of the city, which means they had to be big. The car was designed in part by a transit official named Peter Witt. You're going to hear his name again in a few minutes. There was a problem with the trolley. I want you all to look back at 396, and Keith is our conductor outside. That's where he would be if the trolley had just stopped to pick you up. All right? You would get on through the back door. Okay? So Keith will let you go on. And then when the trolley started up again, the conductor had to come find you to collect your fare. Think that through a little bit. If it's busy, if the trolley's crowded, if the next stop isn't too far along, he's probably going to miss a fare or two or three. Right? That wasn't perfect. 396, you can go ahead. We're all set. So Mr. Witt here in Cleveland had a better idea. He said, let's keep the conductor, not the borderman. Get Rick out of the way there. Let's put the conductor in a fixed place. The fixed place is between the two doors, where Mike is pointing. They gave him a seat. About 8 inches of hard wood with a little dip in the middle. Imagine being in that position, bounding along on the whole trip, right? So Doug is going to demonstrate right now. Mike, get into your position here. You notice they're marked entrance and exit, so if you were getting on, you would get the entrance door. Whoops, maybe. Yeah, pay the conductor, and then when you got to your stop, you'd leave through the middle. Look how small the doors are. All right, you have this big car that everybody had to squeeze through those little doors. Mr. Witt kind of perfected things a little bit better later on, but this was the start of it. Cleveland thought of everything. There's a coal-fired stove and blower in the far side of the car. They were removable. In summertime, they'd take the furnace out, and they had a seat that could drop in its place. They thought of everything. They also thought of one other way of dealing with all those people, something that in the trolley era we called trailers. It's a car that looks exactly like the trolley, but it's not powered. It's just towed along by the trolley in front of it. They would put those on at rush hour to handle the big crowds. We have a trailer. It has not yet been restored, but we're looking forward to a day when we can bring this down and have 100 feet of passenger car to show you. Some of you who are familiar with the Cleveland area might know of a suburb that was a planned community. It's called Shaker Heights. One of the selling points of Shaker Heights was that it came with its own transit system to get you into Cleveland. This car eventually became part of Shaker Heights Rapid Transit. Then it fell into the hands of some other museums and a private collector who eventually donated it to us, and it was a wreck when it came here. It had been vandalized, it was in tough shape. This is an example of what the Seashore Trolley Museum's restoration shop is capable of doing. This is not just a cosmetic outside thing, it's been thoroughly done on the inside. Ladies and gentlemen, from Cleveland, Ohio, car number 1227. We often get asked, how long does it take to do the restorations? It's all over the place. 1227 took about 25 years and on foot. Now, one of the most unusual cars in our collection. Anybody in the audience from the state of New Hampshire? How about Manchester? Anybody? Oh, we got we're back there? All right. Dan, could you pull up just a few more feet? This is the city of Manchester. A one-of-a-kind car built in 1898. Some of the early builders of streetcars were companies that had built carriages. One of the better known in New England was the Briggs Carriage Company of Amesbury, Massachusetts. They built this car. It was the official car of the Manchester, New Hampshire Street Railway. They would use this for official inspection trips. They could take visiting dignitaries around the city. Or, at that time, you could rent the car for $5 a day. What you can't easily see, all four corners of the interior are corner cabinets, mahogany cabinets, with beveled, mirrored glass on their outside. And we understand that at least one of those cabinets, if there were dignitaries involved, was always stocked with potent portables. Not for the crew, of course, but for the dignitaries. In the early 1950s, one of our members found the body of this car. It was on a farm in New Hampshire where it was being used as a playhouse for the farmers' children. On the spot, he offered the farmer some money. The farmer sold it to him. He turned around and donated it back to the Trolley Museum. This is one of our earliest restoration projects in the 1960s, before we had our modern shop. And we are so lucky that we were able to put it back to its original appearance when it was carrying passengers and not children playing in it. So ladies and gentlemen, from Manchester, New Hampshire, the city of Manchester. This car has an important job coming up in a few weeks. Seashore has become a place for people to hold their weddings. Sometimes down here on the campus, sometimes out at Talbot Park. And the city of Manchester will be used to bring some of the bridal party to and from the wedding in the middle of September. So it's got a job to do, and it's very capable of doing that. What is this? It's not a trolley. You are looking at a contraption called a rail bike. Last year, the Seashore Trolley Museum partnered with a company called Revolution Rail, hence the Seashore. Revolution Rail in a number of areas in the United States. Has set up
Jesus Christ, that thing is
operations
long.
using
That blue one.
aluminum frame, wheel, pedal-driven, covering all over the face, rail bikes. These actually move with people pedally. And they set up operations here several times a day, several days of the week. Folks can pedal out to Talbot Park. Then they get the easy part, which is coming back in, because that's the downhill. And the bikes are made.
You can hear it.
The two-seater or a four. It's always folks from Revolution Rail going along with everybody. It's a lot of fun. It's good exercise too. You discover the muscles that you didn't know you had in your legs. You can find out a lot more about this on our website, trolleymuseum.org. But if you haven't experienced it, it's a lot of fun. Probably check out the folks at Revolution Rail. I imagine you folks will be around after the parade. So if you see them in their orange shirts and you want to find out more, just go ahead and ask them. The other great thing about this is they're so lightweight, they can be taken on and off the railroad. But Seashore has a little distinction. We're the only one of their sites that is an actual operated railroad. Most of their other locations, they're on lines that no longer operate. So it's an interesting mix of the trolleys and the rail bikes. So ladies and gentlemen, our newest partners, if you will, our friends from Revolution Rail. Now, a pedal rail vehicle is nothing new. Even back in the day, they had items called velocities. They looked like a small bike with flanged wheels and other wheels. Horse operating, pushed back and forth on the lawn. So it's an interesting take on that. All right, now, I've got to explain why we're doing what we're doing. There are some cars that we're using in the parade today that for one reason or another cannot be on this track that we're on. So we're going to show them from a distance. You might have a clue where car 1700 is from the advertising sign. This is 1700 from Sydney, Australia. This and a tram we have from New Zealand have come the farthest distance to be here. 1700 was built around 1925. The date is a little uncertain. But it's a unique design. Some of you have written on an open car today. This is sort of open. Those are compartments with bench seats that can hold 10 people in a compartment. And they have folding doors on them, leather pleated doors. So the passengers were quite comfortable. But the conductor had to walk the running board to go from compartment to compartment. It was considered a fairly dangerous job. At one time, Sydney had a huge, they called it tram. I'll use it, tram system. In fact, the second largest in the British Empire, second only to London. It all went away in 1961. The year before, this came here. This has been out of service for very technical reasons. Our restoration shop guys kind of got the proverbial bee in their bonnet. We thought, are there cars in our collection that could be brought back to operating condition without a lot of time investment? In 1700, the first one to come through this. It's not quite ready for public use yet, but it's on its way. We're hoping to bring it back into the fleet later in the year. By the way, there's always interesting connections with trolleys. These could be coupled together in trains of 2 cars, all controlled from the front where our Lord and Bob is standing. When they were researching what type of control system they should put on these cars, they came to the United States. They came to Massachusetts. If you walk around the front of South Boston Bar on your way out, you'll see a bright orange trolley sitting up on blocks while they work on it. It's got the same control system as this because Australia went to General Electric and said, we like the control system you're using on those Massachusetts trolleys, we want to use them on ours. So ladies and gentlemen, from Sydney, Australia, car number tram number 1700. Also notice the spacious compartments, the back end of the conductor and the motorman to be in. Those of us who are in the belly brigade sometimes have trouble getting in and out of there. All right, anybody from Minnesota or that part of the country? Okay. This is car 1267 from Minneapolis, built in 1907. When Minneapolis was trying to figure out who should build their newer trolley cars at that time, they didn't think that any of the builders could design a car that could stand up to the Minnesota winter. So they built them themselves in their own shops. They built almost 1,100 of the type of trolley car that you see. These are called gate cars. Guys, can you open the gate at the back? When the car stopped, everybody would climb into that back compartment. The gate would close, the car could get going again. Then the conductor would deal with collecting your fare. Again, Minnesota winters, you don't want anything powered or air-powered freezing up. So that's all mechanical. When Richard moves the lever, it's a whole long rod system that makes the gate open and shut. The car was in service until the 1950s. Trolley service ended in Minneapolis in St. Paul in 1954. It came here just as Seashore was putting the finishing touches on the very first power station. So this car has the distinction of being the first car in our collection to actually operate here with its own power. So ladies and gentlemen, from Minneapolis and St. Paul, 1267.
Dad, back up.
What's that?
Back up. Because they're taking the bus around here.
Okay. This is the difficult part. This car was only designed to run in one direction to route to the end. They have to back the car up. The trolley pole kind of facing the wrong direction. Any Canadians in our audience today? Toronto. This is car 2890 from Toronto, Canada. Toronto has one of the most extensive public transportation systems in North America. And this type of car played a key role in the 1920s. This is 2890. It's called a Peter Litt car, we've heard his name before. We'll get to the reason why. These were built in the 1920s, and there were two sizes.
You guys can sort of head down that way. We're going to bus in across here as the next thing.
This was the design you brought in and your orders were go by him. So if you sat down front, you paid when you left the car. If you wanted to sit in the back, actually you had to pay him before he could sit down. So it's easy to train the conductors. Okay? Anybody coming at you from your right hasn't paid you yet. Make sure that you do. Bono and Gus listen to these outside of Toronto called Home County Radio Railway. This was part of their collection, but it was kind of an extra, something they didn't really need that much. We had a car here at Seashore that we weren't doing much with, so we traded. When the trailer came down from Toronto with this car, we had the other car ready, cars flipped, everybody's happy, and we're now proud to have a Toronto car. Last year, our second Toronto trolley arrived. It's actually over in our bus yard behind South Boston, the Canadian Light Rail Vehicle. You can certainly check that out later. So, ladies and gentlemen, from the north, from Toronto, Canada, our car number 2890. Oh, about the conductor, that thing didn't last long. The trolley lines by then were dealing with financial problems. It's expensive to pay 2 salaries. So what did they do? They fired the conductor. They went to the motorman and said, "You're getting a new job. It's called operator. We're going to give you some new tools. We're going to put this big thing next to you called a fare box that people can drop their money in." And well, some of the people might not have the exact change, so we're going to give you this thing you wear on your belt called a money changer, so you can make change for that. And we put all these mirrors up above your operating position. You're able to look up and see what your passengers are doing. Oh, and by the way, you also have to drive the car. And there's not really much more money to pay. So they did away with the conductors, replacing operators, and it wasn't the greatest thing ever. All right. In Seashore's collection are not just trolley cars, but other things related to the transit industry. We talked earlier about the fact that buses replaced trolleys in many towns and cities, and in some cases there was both. So we thought we ought to bring one of our members of our bus collection out. This is number 8105, built in the early 1960s for Bangor. It is a General Motors bus, what they call their new look bus. Almost the entire front is glass, even down where the driver's feet. So the nickname in the transit industry, these were called fishbowl buses.
You would see it though, right? The fishbowl. I just find it a funny name or nickname.
And then it came here. Some of our operators, our trolley operators, are also licensed bus drivers. One of them is John Whitman, who's over here now. And he was actually driven school buses earlier in his career. But he didn't stick with that. So, ladies and gentlemen, from Lewiston onward, and earlier from Bangor, Maine, part of our bus collection, number 8105. All right, now, what's going to come first, though? You hear the noise getting up. The next vehicle is not coming to ground yet. You have to be able to hear it. It can run on the road with the rubber tires. Or you use the rubber tires to drive a set of flange gears to run on the rails. This thing is a Swiss Army knife. For the heck of it, when I was preparing the parade, I went on Pennygold's site just to see the list of attachments. All right? Right now, there's a hook. It can have plows. It can have scoops. It can have an electromagnet. That's really cool when that thing's picking up scrap steel. It can have an auger. It can have many other typical things that you can use in railroad construction. The railroads love these. And we do use this a lot. This was out picking up scrap a few weeks ago. Or it can be out on the line, helping the crew lift up ties, perhaps even picking up the rail car, if that were ever to happen. The gentleman operating it, Brian, is one of the principal driving forces in our restoration project. He and his staff made it possible for a lot of the trolleys to be in the parade today. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have to be honest with you, we have multiple heavy bones, and I'm not sure which railroad this is from. So we'll just say from Seashore's collection, number 4307, our heavy bone street.
Follow Tom after the pettibone clears. Tom's going to call you guys down. We don't know. Be prepared to lead the way to go help or go back.
Because with trolleys, we're not just dealing with rails. We have to work on what's above them, the wire. And I can never assume, just so you know, there is 600 volts of direct current in that wire. Right? It's direct current. That's the positive. The negative is for the rails. Rob Fry is our overhead line superintendent. He's up there now. Touching. Nothing sapping him through his gloves. He's got gloves on. He's insulated. Oh, he's taking his gloves off. He's wetting his finger. He's not getting electrocuted because he's only touching one side, the positive. He would have to make contact with ground. And if he's a good boy, he's wearing his insulated boots. He's standing on a wooden platform on a trolley that has a canvas roof with wood underneath. There's not much chance that he's going to get electrocuted. In all seriousness, this is what they use to work on the wire. Many times they had to do the work while the power was on. This platform, we won't do it, but the platform can also swing out from the car and say they needed to work on the poles or some of the hangers that hold up the wire. Rob and his crew have been instrumental in wiring up the new building that's behind you. This South Boston car barn replaced a much older, earlier structure that you see. It's one of the great engineering feats, figuring out for all the wire out there. They've been working on it. In all of this, I forgot to tell you about the car itself. This is line car 4 from Claremont, New Hampshire. Built sometime around the turn of the 19th and 20th century. I'm not sure of the date. And there's two stories that no one is sure of. One says it was originally some sort of a passenger car that was converted into the work car. Another story said the trolley line's master mechanic home built this. But either way, it's a very important tool for us. So much so, this has been borrowed twice by the MBTA in Boston. When some of their line equipment is broken down, this has been in the Boston subway, helping to make things right. It all set up there. Now, you going to show them how to use signal to your waterman? Oh, I forgot. Before you do that, Rob, I forgot. The tower is all the way down. There is a crank inside the car. Some of you can see it over here. That tower can lift. Get up much higher than it is. There. So Rob can't see his motor, vice versa. So this is how they do it when they need to signal that it's time to go. It's a rope. And now it'll go on. car 500 from the Boston and Maine Railroad, which used to be the big regional railroad system. There's a company in Minnesota called the Fairmont Company, which made all kinds of work equipment for railroads. This would be called a speeder. It would be used to take work crews to job sites along the railroad. This one in particular was used as a track inspection car. You could go out and inspect the railroad. This is the Cadillac of these speeders. It's got bucket seats. Dave is very comfortable in it. It can seat 8. I still want to know how 8 people would be needed to inspect the railroad, but that's another discussion. For the gearhead in the audience, it would have originally had 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, 4-cylinder Waukesha engine, which we have, but it's not functional. So our shop guys, especially Dave, were able to figure out how to put a Dodge Slant 6 from the 1970s Dodge vehicle into the car, and they got it back to working condition. A few times a year we do a speeder day here with both some of our own members' personal equipment and this is also always leads the way. This has a unique place in the collection of the Seashore Trolley Museum. It is the only rail vehicle that came here under its own power. It was still in service of the Boston and Maine Railroad. So on a quiet Sunday, they kind of sent orders for it, put a crew on it, and they drove it up the railroad to Kennebunk, where our folks took it off and brought it over here. So ladies and gentlemen from all over New England, like from the Boston area, our inspection car number 500. Think of driving a pickup truck without having to steer. Hi, this is locomotive number 150. Obviously, it's not electric. This is a new. It's a 25-ton General Electric. GE built hundreds of this type of locomotive, different sizes. From the 1940s all the way to the 1970s. This one was built in 1944. It was first used by 2 different companies in New Haven, Connecticut, not New Haven Railroad, but private companies. And that tended to be its claim to fame. These were used especially by businesses, companies, factories that had rail yards and needed to move some of the cars in the yard. These are designed for work, not for speed. This can come out at 20 miles an hour. But when you're carefully moving things, that low speed is important. Eventually, it can be part of the fleet of the problems in Worcester Railroad, where it was used as a guard engine, and came here 4 years ago. Now, we have some cars that can't move under their own power, and we have locations on the property where there's no power available for our electric vehicles. So 150 is frequently used to move things that we're not moving their own power. Terry, can you hear me up there? I just want to show the folks how slow this can go. Can you creep up a few feet? It looks like it's this big, ungainly thing. Watch how slow Terry can make this move. So if you're trying to couple up to some cars or navigate a tight space, you can move very slowly. Thanks, Terry. Diesel locomotives with diesel motor that you hear drives a generator or an alternator that sends power to a traction motor, electric motor, trolleys have. And on these, there's only one motor. It's on the back axle. And then there's a chain drive from the back axle to the front axle. So you can develop a lot of power. So letting come from all over New England, but most recently the Providence Blister, our locomotive number 150. Anybody here from Connecticut today? All right. This is car number 1160 from New Haven. This was built in 1907 and is very typical of city streetcars of that day. What you can't see is the seats. There's only two of them. They run under the windows the entire length of the car. Our motorman is sitting down for you. Thank you, John. That leaves this big, wide space in the middle of the aisle to pack people down. You may have heard sometimes of people that ride standing up being referred to as strap hangers. Today, the things they hold on to are usually stainless steel handles. But back in the day, they were actual leather straps. And this car is full of them. So they could pack this car. People said that this particular type of car reminded them of a certain sport, having that big, wide middle aisle. Anybody care to, not the rail fans in the audience, anybody care to guess what sport? Bowling. These are called bowling alley cars, because you had enough room there to really get the ball rolling. These were scandalous, though, in the early days, because having that long seat meant that a single woman traveling by herself might actually have to sit next to a man that she did not know. A little bit of controversy. In later years, this became a work car and eventually made its way here to Seashore.
Montreal.
Train to Montreal.
No, no, there's no train to Montreal in here. The only one is from New York.
That goes from Vermont, right?
New York.
The Vermont or what?
It used to.
To Montreal doesn't anymore.
No, it used to be the Montrealer. Now, the Vermonter ends in St. Albans.
All right, where's it from? New Orleans. This is car number 966
Why not?
from that great city.
I'm surprised, because
This
SPM
car was
is
built in
the thing
1924.
for Montreal.
If
Yeah, I think they've been around for like ever.
find yourself stuck in traffic on a school bus, on a lot of the buses you are going to see on the back panel, Thomas built bus. You ever wonder who Thomas was and what he built? It was originally the Pearlie Thomas Car Company of High Point, North Carolina. They built trolley cars. And they built many of the trolleys that ran in New Orleans, including 966. The line in New Orleans was